Dana Carvey, welcome to the Bladtcast. Thank you for helping us celebrate 10 years.
Man, so you predate or overlap when you were Dennis Miller's producer. You were on the side, always having your own podcast.
Yeah, I started doing the Bladtcast. It was a very specific moment where I was like, oh, I can do this. I grew up, always listened to Howard Stern. I've heard you on there a few times. You're fantastic. Now, I never for a second thought I was anywhere near as talented as Howard Stern. But when he got his own channel and they started having the Superfan show, the after show, and then the after show to the after show, I was like, well, I could do that. I'm at least as entertaining as Baba Booey. Maybe not as much as John Hine. So I started the idea for the show was it was going to be about the Dennis Miller Show, and we did it for the website, and that lasted like 2 weeks, and then we just kind of talked about whatever was going on in pop culture, trying to make each other laugh and that kind of stuff. But it started as the idea was it's like for fans of the Dennis Miller Show, if you want a little something extra, if you like us who you hear behind the scenes. And the one smart thing I did in the early episodes, I probably did this for most of the first year, we would have what we called the DMZ Spotlight. The DMZ was the premium membership for the radio show. So if you were a regular caller or somebody who posted a lot, it's like, be a guest on our show. And it was like, oh, do you want to hear your friend who calls in? Do you want to learn more about Gene in Philly? Everyone wanted to learn more about Gene in Philly, apparently. So I don't know. That was my branding. And, it was doing the podcast for 1 year where I suddenly started to feel I got delusions of grandeur, Dana. I was like, well, Dennis is sick. I can fill in. It'll be all right. And I did that a few times. I guest hosted a nationally syndicated radio show for 300 stations, big markets, some of them.
Did your nerves the first time you did that? Was you
First time it was last minute because Dennis was sick and our regular guest hosts were out, but we'd had a couple of good guests booked. So I talked to my boss. I was like, let me give it a try. If it's bad after the first hour, we'll go to a best of. And because Dennis, having come from television, he was used to having really detailed prep for all of his guests, to the extent that I would put sample questions in there. Years later, I realized that most people in radio don't do that. Howard probably does, but most everybody else doesn't. But so I'm like, well, I've got the questions for literally for everybody, So it was like, who's the guy who did Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head? BJ number Baker. That would have been great. The guy who sang it though.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Some
BJ. Not BJ Novak, because he's from The Office, but like BJ Ryan. So I was like, I know what to talk to him about, So it was all right. It wasn't like a super heavy political show. And I kind of BS'd my way through it. And for 10 years, I've been BSing my way through my own podcast. And I know that you're a new entrant into the world of podcasting, but I don't think it's weird for me to promote your podcast because I think people know it at this point. That's like if it's like promoting, McCartney's new album. It's like, he's got one. It's okay. It's like, hey, Bruce Springsteen's out on tour. Do you want to go buy tickets? You already did. But fly on a wall.
Sorry, those $5,000 a seat, but I don't got nothing to do with the tickets. I told Obama he can get 4 for Cleveland.
Thank you very much. No, it's it's interesting. The Howard Stern of it all, like, okay, what is he doing? First of all, fly on the wall. Thank you very much. But it's been 1 year in a few weeks. And everyone I talked to is like, wow, it's tough. Like if we'd gone in and I'm not sure the exact numbers. They started in 2018. I guess you started in 2013. 2018, maybe there was 700,000 podcasts. Now there's 3 million. And it's much harder to land and grab. And it was just whimsical that now, it's different because I have a true, and he has, we're true co-hosts. So it's different. So you're a one-man band. You don't have a pithy sidekick or a woman.
No, but I have like a peanut gallery. I have like, the other guys who I used to work with on the radio show, but they're not with me every show. But yeah, it's you and David Spade, AKA Spudley, that you guys do the show together. And you could both have hosted your own podcast. That wouldn't have been, it sounds like a backhanded compliment, but I mean it well. And instead it's like, yeah, just put them together and let's have them talk to, people about SNL. And I mean, you've watched it go from like, oh yeah, let's talk to people who we know who were on the show. Dennis did a great episode, Colin Quinn, who I know really well. But then it's like, oh, McCartney's going to be on. So what's it like to have it go from like, let's talk about SNL with people who were on the show to, oh, you want to talk to a Beatle?
Well, it was, we also really wanted Lorne Michaels, obviously, who doesn't do much. He did do a Mark Maron podcast like 6 years ago or something like that, which I listened to just to get a vibe. I know Lorne very well, but it was nice he came on. The Paul thing was just sort of like, oh, we need a musician. And our mutual manager, Mark Gervitz. Anyway, he said, will you write Paul?
Gervitz.
Will you write Paul an email asking him? I hate to do that stuff. He goes, I know his assistant, get it to her. I mean, she'll just hand it to him. So I just wrote him one. Dear Paul, I'd met him in New York a little bit. I met him at Lorne Michaels' house when I first got the show, but he meets a lot of people, He gave me on the 40th, 2016, he was in the audience when I was doing Chop and Broccoli on N888H, the television special, just for your listeners or viewers.
Sure, yeah.
And I started playing For No One, the little, your day breaks, your mind aches, you think that all you... So he stood up. This is during the commercial break, and I got the piano for Chop and Broccoli. He goes, I know what you're doing. And he did the 6 shooters, whatever that means. Tom Hanks stood up, Jimmy Fallon. So then after the show, we did Wayne's World at the end, me and Mike Myers, and we're off to the side, and the Mount Rushmore of, Bill Murray, Steve Martin are over there. Suddenly someone is massaging my neck. And it was Paul. You seem a bit tight, Dane, So I sent him this email, and I didn't know if it was like, who wrote Twist and Shout, whatever. So I just said, we can talk about your friendship with Lorne, because they're really good friends, and your appearances on SNL. And then I'm on vacation in Wyoming with my mother-in-law, my wife, and one of my sons. And Gervitz says, Paul can come on Friday. And it's like Wednesday. We weren't in a fancy hotel. We had no Wi-Fi. I had to go to the Four Seasons in the Grand Tetons in a lightning storm the night before to get good Wi-Fi. So then I can't believe it. I'm going to have Paul McCartney on the Zoom. Yeah. Spade is in New York. He's having technical issues for a half hour. People coming in and out of his hotel room. Not sure he's going to make it. Suddenly it's Paul. I'm thinking erroneously that he had read the email, and don't ask him about the Beatles. He might get upset. So I'm just trundling along with them. And I talked about touring. And then finally I brought up Get Back, because I realized I don't think he'd done a podcast since I came out. So then he really wanted to talk about Get Back. And that emancipated
the Peter Jackson documentary, not just the song. But,
sorry, yeah.
No, that's for everybody else. But no. I mean, for those of us who, when it premiered and we're like, well, this is 8 hours, but I guess I'm not going to sleep, because it was so crazy, because it's like people, other musicians and different kinds of music, everybody just sort of watching that process. Paul sits down and he's like, oh yeah, I'm working on something, and you're like, fucking Hey Jude that he's working on,
I know they become, and he said he would kind of soft pedal it to the guys, yeah, I'm trying a little something here. But at one point I took a chance. I said, did John Lennon ever thank you for his bass lines? And so then after that, he got really excited. And so we found our way to come together, and how John wanted it fast. And he said, let's slow it down. And he wrote that bass part. And what I realized later, now that you're into this too, is when people have a little bit of, there's the truth and then there's what people think. But forensically for Beatle fanatics, it's like Paul and John, like, we know it's a John song, but did Paul write the middle eight on No Reply? What did he think when the bass line for Dear Prudence, did they talk about? I like it, so that's endlessly fascinating, because it's like trying to catch the wind. You never know. But here's my last epiphany. I'll let you comment, was that if I present it to Paul, like, did he thank you for bass lines? Then Paul can answer about his bass lines But if he brings it up, I wrote some really great bass lines for John songs. He would never do that as a Liverpudlian gentleman. So that's all. If you just ask it as a fan, then it opens a door for him. So we had a very nice last 20 minutes of talking about them playing and Get Back. And his main thing was them laughing, seeing him and John laughing and joking around. But I think that Paul was in the lead at that given point in time. And all the seedlings for Abbey Road were kind of played around with. You never give me your money. And even George is going, something in the way. What do you think the next line is? So that's fascinating. Anyway.
No, it is. And it's interesting because it wasn't until after I watched it that somebody pointed out, like, well, John and Yoko were, let's just say allegedly, trying to kick heroin at the time. And that's why he's always late. And I'm like, oh, I didn't know that when I watched it, but all of a sudden those little pieces start to come in and it's like, well, John's not here. And then just the very matter of fact way that George is like, well, I'll be leaving then, and it's like, did he just quit the Beatles? And like, I think he did. And then they have to put it on the screen. I'm like, okay, yeah, he did quit. But, Ringo's just like, yeah, man, I'm just here to have some fun. This is great. But, look, I could talk to you about Get Back for an hour, but I'll talk about the one thing that's really stood out as my favorite, which was, I guess it was Linda's daughter. So I guess her name would have been Heather Eastman.
Yeah.
And she's so little in that. Yeah. And she's just jumping up and sitting at the piano. And I'm just like watching him with this little girl. And I'm just like, this is the sweetest thing I've ever seen. You see so much stuff with the Beatles, but I'd never seen anything like that. And I was just like, I didn't know I could love Paul McCartney more, but there it was,
Well,
and,
did you get adrenalized when he's in the hallway and he's throwing her way up in the air like dads do and catching her, but really high? You're like, damn. That's like,
like I throw my daughter's 5. She's very little. I do that. And my wife's like, oh, okay, that's enough.
And they love it. They go crazy for it. So how do you? Yeah.
Well, we've already referenced our mutual friend, Mr. Dennis Miller, and I actually want to start with that because you probably know this, but it's fascinating that there are not that many Saturday Night Live auditions that you can find on YouTube. Yours is one of them. Hartman's is another one, and but in yours, in like the first minute before you go into some impressions, I guess Dennis is sitting there when you audition for SNL.
Yeah.
And before you do anything as part of your actual audition, you do the Dennis impression, which you don't do on the show for like years, because let's be honest, at that point he was on SNL. People didn't really know him so much in like 1986.
I didn't know that. Really I've never watched it, so I didn't know.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So it's you're just, it's like, you do him, so you're like, Carvey, give him Robin Leach, something like that. And so you do the Robin Leach impression, but you're like making everyone laugh because it's like, oh, this guy does a Dennis Miller impression.
Oh, yeah. Interesting. Yeah. I didn't do it for a long time until somehow Dennis and I guess kind of decided I would go on Update as him.
Yeah.
His doppelganger.
And like so much of it is the voice, but if you see that, it's like you have to have that like sneer, because it's like the voice goes a long way, but it's like you got to look like him. And it's like, you always kind of had that, you'd be tapping the pencil and you would say things that say, when you said before, I'm up in the Grand Tetons, it's like, that's the kind of thing that Dennis would say, and so, but my real question is, how long did you know him that you'd worked up a little bit of a Dennis impression?
I know, it's funny. We met. I was headlining the San Jose Improv at the time. I don't think it's the new ones like 400 seats, but it was a big gig. I think it was like 82 or something like that, and I think either he picked me up at the airport or I picked him up and I met him. And anyway, so he's my opener, right? Because I was kind of a big shot in the Bay Area. Right. And so I wouldn't pay much attention to my middle. I was in pretty good shape at that point. I was still fledgling, and then I'd hear some vibrations and some roars coming from the room. It was like, and then I would go on stage and I realized that my normal shtick wasn't quite working, because Dennis his energy was so potent when he caught the audience. You couldn't just go up and do something else, You'd have to kind of deal with that energy. So we got to know each other then. And then I ran into him at the Comedy Magic Club. And I remember when he was on SNL, I was somewhere driving somewhere, it might have been Kevin Pollak or Kevin Nealon, one of the Kevins, and Dennis. And he was telling me how terrifying the nerves of being on SNL. So this is 85.
Right.
I get on unbeknownst to me next year. Christ sakes, Carvey. I mean, it's a death machine over there. All right. You get one shot or you're out. And so that rhythm and attitude was so infectious, that I still like doing. I like doing the tight muttering Dennis now, tight jawed. Okay. I'll let you do down there, Chris. Okay. Interviewing Carvey again. All right. I did it about 1,900 times. You got that many to go. Just that sort of rhythm. Yeah. He's got a lot of sub rhythms. It's John Lovitz is another one. I know.
Yeah.
Happy, like some character voices these two guys have, man.
And Lovett's obviously having a renaissance right now because of the Long Island congressman. He
went on Fallon. Has he done more stuff with it? I mean,
Well, he did that, and then he was on Howard for a little bit, and he did that. But then he also did what in the old days they would have called panel. But then he did interview as Lovitz, and it was great. I've known John nowhere near as long as you, but I've known him for a while, and I'm always telling him like you have all these stories. Why are you not podcasting? He was kind enough to do my 500th episode last year. And I was like, John, I'll talk to you for an hour. And at like 90 minutes, I'm like, okay, well, I'll wrap it up. He's like, I don't have anywhere to go. I'm like, I'll keep talking to you, It was, but he's so, and it's so funny though, because
John.
yeah, no, and it was great though. I mean, it's so funny to, and he's obviously very honest. One of the things that he talked about, since we're talking about Lovitz, was the movie that you guys did together with Nicolas Cage. And I guess he was very upfront about how he did not like the director, and Nicolas Cage didn't like that director, and just like the movie never had a chance. But what do you have any specific memories? The movie's called Trapped in Paradise. Perhaps not everyone's seen it, but my friend Bill, it's one of his favorite movies of all time. So that's why I always like he'll be so disappointed if I don't ask you about it.
It had all the elements except the I didn't really know what I was doing, and that's a longer story, but I liked Nicolas Cage. I thought he was a really cool actor. So Nicolas Cage is going to be in it. And then I always had fun with John, and so I thought, well, it'd be nice, the three of us, Christmas movie, when you read the script or we're inside the script, the tone of it, like apparently the director wanted it to be Pesci, De Niro, and like Walken or something. Right. Three real New York tough guys. So then he gets two comedians and Nicolas Cage. So I was going to dailies because, those guys could sleep in all day. I had kids with me in Canada, so I was up early anyway. So I went to some of the dailies, and we had these two characters kind of tagging us, detectives, and they were great actors. They were just directed to play it very broad, almost like a cartoon characters. So once you didn't have a straight line, that really kind of upended things a little bit. So movies mostly don't work. Sometimes there's for a lot of different reasons, but I was pretty sure at that point it wasn't going to work. So when I saw those guys doing cartoon characters, I decided to do a cartoon character myself, which was the character Alvin, I think. So I did sort of Mickey Rourke combined with Brad Gray, my manager at the time.
Right.
So, I don't know what you're doing. I don't know what you're saying. And it kind of broke my heart because I did have some amazing runs from my point of view as that character. Right. They're in prison, and I do a giant thing. They ask him a question, but he has a jawbreaker in his mouth, and it takes him like a minute and a half to get the jawbreaker out. But then when I saw the edit, like, as you maybe know from movies, this is old time movies. When you go to dailies, you see the master shot, you see everything. That's so funny. Then you see it later cut together. Right. So that 1 minute, say it was 1 minute, and it was really funny, I believe, was cut down to 2 seconds.
Right.
So in the editing or whatever, so it was just kind of a train wreck. but it has fun elements. The characters are really likable. The snow looks real. And there was some great townspeople playing straight to us. So it still has some core things that are charming. It's a little frustrating with a rewrite and a little bit of different direction and just a quick rewrite for clarity and have a looser edit on it. Not so, it probably could have been a really good movie.
Right. I mean, I think that a lot of times, just as viewers in the audience, a lot of times you'll see a movie and you go like, I mostly liked it. It was almost there. And, you don't think about what it was missing, but a lot of times there was something else. Another movie I wanted to ask you about that I haven't heard you talk about. You did a movie with Richard Pryor called Moving, which he did not like, but how was it to work? This is fairly late in his career, but how was that to get a chance to work with, one of the all-time greats?
Freaky deaky, beyond the beyond. I did a bit in my special about my first encounter with Richard Pryor. I was his waiter at the Holiday Inn in Belmont, California. I was, and he was playing the local theater, the Circle Star Theater. So I brought him the Denver omelet and all that. So I'd met him then. And then I'm on SNL maybe for 6 months. And this, can't remember the name of the director, sorry, asked me to do it and said, we'll let you just improvise your lines kind of. I played a schizophrenic, right, where Richard Pryor is sort of the straight-laced family guy, and he hires me to drive his car across country. And so 2 things. One was I'm doing this scene with Richard, and the director pulls me aside and goes, Richard, it's really hard to get Richard going. He said he wants to signal to the audience that this is just a paycheck. I'm not going to go for it. So he said, can you try to get Richard going? I go, fuck, really? Try to get Richard going. So then I start really pushing a lot of energy. I can't remember what is that, I know what I'm doing. Yeah. But finally, Richard started to kind of, what's your name, young man? That kind of thing. So then I got him going. And then one time I went during lunch hour, the whole set's like a ghost town. I went in the wrong trailer. I thought it was some other makeup trailer. And so then he was sitting in there, maybe it was the makeup trailer, in the dark by himself with like Kleenex around his neck because he has makeup, sure, it's the scars from and then we had a nice chat there. Very sensitive guy, very soft-spoken, super sincere, super curious about me. How are you, young man? What's going on? So, but it was a fun part. I mean, I ran into Eddie Murphy at the mall with Lovitz at some point during after that movie came out, and he goes, you know Dana, don't you? And Eddie just goes, yeah, I know him from Richard's movie, Moving. Yeah. So that was,
oh yeah, of course.
Yeah.
One of my favorite moments of just referencing to Eddie Murphy, and my understanding is that they're okay now, but years after Spade said what he said about Eddie Murphy on SNL, like, oh look, a falling star, and he called in and yelled at him, but like years later, I think I heard Spade tell the story. Chris Rock had mentioned, he was at something with Eddie, and Spade was like, oh, okay, and he's like, and he still hates you. And that went on for a little while, but it's funny, I guess when you think about being on that show, all the people that have come before you. For me, I was like in middle school when you guys were on, so it's a very biased opinion. To me, it's like, I think it's easy to say like Dennis was the best person, the funniest person that ever sat at that desk, and you and Phil Hartman, to me personally, 2 of the best cast members they ever had. It was really like, Dennis would always say like the 27 Yankees, though. It's like just this murderer's row of all these great, and I don't want to leave anybody out. Like Jan Hooks was also so great, in that cast. And, you just had all those great people, but you're still on after the originals and Eddie and all of that. When you actually start on the show, Dennis had told you that there were nerves. Yeah. Were you maybe not smart enough to have those nerves, or did you feel the same thing? Did Dennis kind of put it in your head like, oh, I'm supposed to be nervous?
I was absolutely fighting my nerves like crazy, especially the very first show, because all of a sudden I'm in Church Lady Moves up front. I do an Aliens. Sigourney Weaver's the host, so I do an alien sketch. I do chopping broccoli. I'm in the cold opening game show Psychic with Jan, and Phil. And so I was terrified, because I'd auditioned for the show 3 times. I'm 31 years of age. This is what I understand. The show only had an 8-show pickup because this 85 was a disaster. Besides Dennison Lovitz and Nora Dunn were brought back.
Yeah. Well, they literally had the studio catch on fire. And I talked to Lovitz about
Yeah,
this.
yeah.
The end of that season is like, and Lauren is like, no, not you, John. You get in the car, you get in the limo, I think. So the idea was like everybody else was burning. And it's like, it's fascinating because when you see who's in that cast, you can sort of understand why it didn't work. But I mean, it's Robert Downey Jr., it's Randy Quaid, it's
you did have Nora Dunn, and you had Lovett.
But it's like, obviously, as brilliant as Robert Downey Jr. goes on to be, even in the short term after that, it's like, probably not the best fit. And I mean, the show's kind of filled with those people. I mean, while you were on, I think Ben Stiller was on for like 3 weeks, maybe,
kind of. Yeah.
Yeah. It's one of those deals, So what do you think it is about that place that some people thrive there? Other people, maybe need a little time and then they can do well there. But that just some people are like, oh, this doesn't work. I mean, there was another season after you left, which is the 94-95 season, where they brought in like Chris Elliott and Michael McKean and Janine Garofalo. And it's like, these are all really funny, talented people. I think Michael McKean did fine, but it was like Janine Garofalo in particular was apparently miserable from what she said about it. And you're like, it's not that she's not funny. I mean, Sarah Silverman was on and like barely had sketches, What do you think it is?
These are quiet, kind of quasi cerebral.
Yeah.
Yes. I think there's a lot of things about it, but I think it's kind of a rock and roll room. When they did, Anna Gasteyer and Molly Shannon did the very quiet NPR Women's Sweaty Balls.
Oh, yeah.
But that was at home base, which means right in the center of the studio, you can really sense the audience and they can hear you. And so that kind of broke the rule, but it's kind of a rock and roll room. And, Phil knew how to like hit it if he needed to. What's the word on that street? Like energy, love it, hang now, and there's a lot of ambient noise. Like the cold opening, generally everything stops. Like when I'm doing Bush Senior, finally the studio goes quiet. But throughout the show, right after the commercial break, there might still be off to the side, stuff's being moved or the camel's being brought in, There's ambient noise and distractions. So I do think that home base and scoring like that, like Sandler with Opera Man at home base, singing so loud and energy and stuff. So that some people, I think, if they're more like jazz players or whatever, and Dennis, his references are genius, but he also had a really strong voice, Chicken over here. Okay. It was, and so that's, but when I got on it or anyone gets on it, you just don't know till you do it. Am I really gonna, I did my 10,000 hours in clubs, and I was harvesting my act. Basically, I'd done the whole church lady as part of my stand-up and said, well, isn't that special? And once that got a laugh, nothing else could have got my blood pressure to go down more than that. Cause I knew, I know where I am now, but still luck, whimsy, ridiculousness, who's in the cast. If you come in later, there's 20 people ahead of you. You're sitting on the bench watching the All-Stars go on for many, many seasons. 10 years, 12 years. So whimsical, really.
Yeah, no, there would be times where, I mean, even in like recent years, you feel like when they count the sort of like, there's like the Don Pardo would do the really big extra breath and featuring, and you're like, oh my God, there's like 8 more people,
I know. Yeah.
And
I know, and go on and on and on and on. Yeah. That's another thing. I came in with just me, Phil, and John were the main 3 male players. And then we had, Victoria, Jan, and Nora, and then we had Kevin.
And Dennis would show up if there was going to be a waiter in the sketch. It would be like, it's like, well, somebody has to, say like, here, can I get you your drink, sir? And then he'd have to go like run and get ready for update.
Yes, but a lot of nights, which I tell him, I go, a lot of nights it just doesn't work. Everyone remembers the best shows.
Sure.
And we were just struggling to get to the midway of, update. And then Dennis would bail us out, or he would crush and bring up the studio, So it's a fever dream, really. Like, what did that really happen? It's such an intense experiential thing, live TV. And people coming on now, like I had to think of Aykroyd, Belushi, those rock star badass, pirates, basically. The first cast, rock stars, superstars. And then Billy Crystal and Christopher Guest, and Dennis and stuff, and Eddie Murphy, of course, the savant, at 19, that goods doesn't make any sense. So by the time I got there, I had that to follow. But now people have they got to follow Bill Hader, they got to follow Will Ferrell, Chris Rock. I mean, just like it's interesting what the new cast is probably going through now. But
right, exactly. I mean, because now you have people who weren't alive for the show's 20th anniversary season. You have people who grew up with people long after the fact, and you can obviously see all of it. You've talked a little bit about the church lady, and I was just sort of wondering, at that time, it's a very religious character. You're doing a parody of sort of something that was prevalent on TV at the time. Was there negative reaction to it from the ultra right, or was it cartoony enough that it was like, oh, we all love the lady? I believe Farley was the one who called her the lady, right?
Well, the first day Chris Rock came in with Chris Farley, I think, and then they just, long story short, started calling me the lady,
right?
And still would call me lady now. If Chris comes on our podcast, lady, and Chris Rock and Chris Farley. So any cast member named Chris would call me the lady. But there was no pushback. It was just everyone loved the character. The Bible Belt loved it. I think because it was silly enough, and it was not what was popular at the time was doing the fire and brimstone preacher as a stand-up.
Right.
And I will heal me, brother. That thing was going on. So my little lane was the women behind the punch bowl with the orthopedic shoes, completely androgynous, who really run the church.
Right.
And the holier than thou part was so extreme. The trap of, wow, and you did this, who could it be? Satan, with the echo, and then the superior dance. So I think it was fanciful enough, and it probably it wasn't in my mindset to kind of try to satire ultra Christians at all.
Right. It's more like people who go to, it's not even just church. There really is that person. And I think
it started without church, by the way.
So
stand-up, it was really one of the first things I did was the patronizing second grade school teacher who feels superior. So I'd have a little piece of paper. Let's make a little sailboat. So it's the exact same character.
Right.
A and then B, and yours isn't quite as good as mine. So the character came from that, and then eventually evolved into religiosity.
What I always liked is sort of like the, before she really goes in for the kill, there's always that moment where she's like ourselves, don't we? Before she gets to what she really wants to say, there's sort of like, when she'd be talking to like Jessica Hahn or someone like that, and I always found it to be great. Now, obviously you get that character. Hans and Franz is another big one. There's so many. Did you get to a point on the show where it was like, all right, I'm going to do one of these and it's not going to get cut. It's going to be in the show? Or would it happen? I was there as an intern, so there was like one half a year where I would see what happened between dress rehearsal and air. And a lot of times it didn't make sense, but you'd sort of be like, okay, but the main characters, the big recurring characters are always their sketches aren't going to get cut. But would that happen sometimes? Like hey, the lady didn't work as well this week, this Hans and Franz, was missing something, or was it always like we want it on the air, so we're going to make it work?
Well, just taking, I mean, one part of that would be, or say Arnold was around and he's going to be
Sure.
on Hans and Franz. So it's getting
Right.
on. I think that Hans and Franz was a show where we could bring in a guest star as well, and that would seal the deal. Church Lady, I accidentally fell into something that Lauren loves. So it's a talk show where I could score. Victoria Jackson was the sidekick at most of the time. She was hysterical, crying. Well, no, Church Lady, calm down. And then we'd have Phil come in and Jan or Sean Penn came in. What happened frequently during that year, there were a couple big religious scandals. So then, can't remember the name, the Reverend whatever. So then Phil would play that guy.
There's Jeremy Swaggart, Falwell. Yeah, there were a few of those.
Yeah, I think Al Franken played Falwell, and then Phil played Swaggart. Anyway, so everything came together with that. I think more like Lovitz and I, John really wanted us to get a thing together, right? So I don't know if we came up with Billionaire Busboys. Did he ever tell you that?
No, I don't think I've heard of that one.
So John and I we do it in Retha. We're playing Billionaire Busboys. So there's a theme song to it. Billionaire busboys, just like you and me. You can see how happy John. Billionaire busboys. They are so carefree. They will clean your table ready when they're ready and able. Oh, billionaire busboys, just like you and me, except they're billionaires. So then we're in a restaurant. We can get fired. We have 24 hours to get another job. So we sit down, people, and we're eating their food and yelling at them. It's just ridiculous. So carefree billionaires. That never got on. We had another one. We tried another one. You couldn't do now, but John and I are test pilots from India, talking like this. You can, so we're like, okay. And then there's a button. What does this button do? And then John would go, I don't know. And then I say, well, we better push it. So we'd push it. We'd go into a nosedive. And then Phil would come in as the Air Force colonel. I don't think he had an accent. What the hell's going on up here? That didn't get on.
Oh my gosh. That's I did talk to Lovitz about the thing that he and Phil had done in the Groundlings first, the Chick Hazard, the sort of the old timey, like, don't beat around the bush. Tell me what it is. And he's like, that whole thing. That was always
fired.
great.
No, give it to me straight.
Yeah.
They did. When I first met them, that's all they did was talk like gangsters, to the point where one of our producers, Dinah Minot, said, is that all they do? I go, I don't know. I just met them, but they're constantly going, what are you saying? Come here, fellas.
But that's enough. You referenced some things that wouldn't fly now. Of course, there's a few of those from anything. Mm-hmm. So I feel like, there can't be the appreciation that there was for a character that was never huge, but he was on a few times, was I believe his name was King Chang, who had the chicken make a lousy house pet. And and it's like, okay, it's very funny. You can sort of understand that. And then for me, I always thought Lyle the effeminate heterosexual was just this great concept, that he sounded the way he did, but it's such a broad character. How is it to sort of think back on like, these are great things, but I guess people will probably never see them at this point, and maybe they shouldn't. I don't know. I mean, it's more, I have fond memories as a kid of seeing these things that you think about now and you're like, oh, yeah, I guess they wouldn't do that now,
Well, a lot of it, like Bill Burr talks about intent a lot. And so obviously take Ching Chang. So I lived in San Francisco, the largest Asian population, and saw a guy in a yard and he had a little leash around a chicken, like standing in his front yard, didn't imagine it. And then the Flight of Fancy didn't deal in any stereotypes or tropes. It was this specific Asian gentleman who came to America with a pet chicken shop, but he was in love with them. So he would try to talk people out. So no one thinks, oh yeah, I've seen that before. That's a cliche. No, that's an abstraction. So Lovitz comes in. How about that chicken? Oh, you don't want that chicken. Why? Chicken make a lousy house pet. He think he like dog, but he not dog. So that I'm not ashamed of it.
No, right.
Just having a white guy playing an Asian guy, it's fine. I mean, I get that. Like someone else could have played that. I would have written it for them because it was just fun to sing. And then he sings My Fair Lady songs at the end. So it was so whimsical. I think Dennis showed it to in Greece on a boat somewhere. And Dennis somehow got Wi-Fi or somehow had it and showed it to Tom Hanks a couple of years ago. And he just rolled up in a ball of laughing so hard he couldn't function, because it's not that it's that funny. It's just the idea that it existed. Ching change. But what I will say is that we did it like 4 times. And the 4th time, we talked all about it being a stereotype. And Ching Chang was very sad. That was
very sad.
Candace Bergen said, well, you're kind of a stereotype. I am. So it was all that.
The most interesting thing about that story is that Dennis got his phone to work to show a clip, much less in Greece. You know, the idea that he could show something to Tom Hanks in Greece. This is coming from somebody who's still actively trying to help him figure out how to get back on Facebook.
Yeah,
but
where's that Athens password, honey? What is it? Aristotle -7 or something like that? No, tell me here something. Yeah. But
it's interesting because the sketches that I referenced, no problem getting them on the air then, but then it was a very different time. Like I vividly, I haven't seen it in decades, but I remember the cold open after Liberace dies. It's just Phil as Liberace at the piano, and he's playing, and then he says, if you think the censors will let us say anything, you're crazy. And then he just does the live from New York. And, there was the big deal about the Peanut sketch where you guys are at the nudist colony and you say, I don't know, 34 times or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to think about like what you could do then, but couldn't. And then, what you can get away with now, but then it's like, what areas aren't you going to go into?
What is happening now in the world of comedy that in 2050, it'll be like, whoa, no. Where is that? Because you can't judge the previous generation because you're never an island on Saturday Night Live. I had producers and writers and network people and censorship people and cast members, and nobody said you ought not be doing that. There's a naivety. I never wanted to do stand-up and have anybody, either a woman or a minority, anybody in the back quietly crying. Like I never had, I wanted to just make everybody laugh. So it's like, if this is making you cry, like really sad, then I would stop. But I just had no connection. It was 35 years ago or something. So
right, exactly. It's and then in terms of I was talking about getting things on the show. I mean, I think that what a lot of people don't realize is that there can be a lot of politics to it. We're talking about the recurring characters, but getting new stuff, it's like, well, who wrote it? Who has, enough stuff in there? I remember I didn't have to sign an NDA when I was an intern, but I remember that Jim Brewer had a sketch that he had written that he was in that he tried to get on a couple of times, and it would get cut after dress or after the read through. And then well-known director now, Adam McKay, wrote a sketch that he felt was similar and then got on the air and he was like livid. Brewer was. And then, another week, something of his got cut so that Tenacious D could perform. I think it was like the debut of Tenacious D. And that was when I was like, I feel like this guy probably won't be back next year because he'd had enough at that point. But I could, just as somebody who grew up watching the show, like really, keeping your head down and not staring and trying to not watch the cast when they're angry, but you'd see it happen and you go like, oh my God, this is like a struggle that you have no idea about if you're not in this room,
Yeah, I mean, I always would say to young comedians, just, who would get into the drama of the stand-up scene, I should be a headline. I go, well, do you get a standing ovation every night? No. You get work to do.
Right.
There's no crying in baseball. There's no complaining at SNL. You have to go in with gratitude. You can be dinged, but never publicly. Yeah. What about me? I'm not getting what I want. No one likes that. I had some really fun, organic alliances with people, with Kevin Nealon and Hans and Franz, and that trundled along. But once the audience hooked it, that we were delusional, paranoid people who were fighting imaginary enemies and threatening them physically. You'd think they were going to lift weights and be really strong. There's none of that. If you doubt us, we could come to your house and stretch your flab into the shape of a ladder so you could crawl down in the sewer, because that's where losers live. To me, it's just like a song, and that's why I went falsetto with it over time. And then I had Mike Myers with Wayne's World, which was always toward the end of the show and the first few times, party on, all that. And then that hooked. And with Phil, it was Carson, and he was playing Ed McMahon. And that was might have been my favorite. I don't know, one up there, because that was the only time I didn't care if the audience laughed. I wanted them to laugh, but Johnny was I was so into his rhythm. And for those of you at home who don't know, and then I always had Phil there. You're correct, sir. So, if you just try to play well with others, there's some luck to it. And then with Robert Smigel, we had Regis. I came in doing Regis, and he goes, let's do something, work together on that. McLaughlin Group. There was other reoccurring things that were really cooking. Yeah. And then all the political stuff, Bush.
Right. And because of those McLaughlin Group sketches, the rest of my life, I was never able to hear the name Jack Germond without laughing,
Jackie Germond, wrong. So that again is just a musicality to it. But there was a time toward, like, after I'd been there 4 years, from 90 to 93, where like, it was sort of crazy. With Perot came about, and then Al Franken is a great ally in the room, and so he loves political comedy. So I was working with him and Jim Downey, not going to do it, all that stuff. And then Wayne's World was coming up on the outside, and Hans and Franz got a movie deal. So it was almost too much kind of coming toward me at that time. But it was pretty thrilling 3 years for sure.
Right. No, and I think that makes sense. And yeah, I mean, Wayne's World starts off as a sketch, like you said, towards the end of the show. And then it's like, then Aerosmith are in there, and then there's filming something with Madonna, and the sketch gets so big, at one point that there were I know there's so many SNL movies that didn't happen, and I guess Hans and Franz being one of them. But I can see that it could be tough to negotiate. I do want to talk a little bit about some of the political stuff, because it's interesting if you're able to see. To me, one of the best debate sketches is you as H.W. Bush when he ran the first time, with Lovitz as Michael Dukakis.
Yeah.
And it's great. They're like great impressions, and there's there's the Lovitz has the great, like, I can't believe I'm losing to this guy,
yeah.
And then he has like the little lift to bring him up a little higher, and it's stuff like that. And it's so funny to think, like, oh my God, John spent all that time developing a Michael Dukakis impression that he didn't get to do much with. And I kind of remember, the cast before you guys, a couple casts before you guys, this guy Gary Kroger was on, and he like did a bit on what was called SNL News at the time, and he's like, I worked really hard on my my Walter Mondale impression, because I figured I'd be doing it for 4 years, and that was the joke of, there was no reason to learn that Walter Mondale impression. But the George H.W. Bush impression, as he goes on as president, you get more things, because like the beginning, it's a lot of like 1,000 Points of Light. Different thing. Yeah.
Didn't have a hook. It's just kind of whiny and flat, Texas flat or whatever, and that was it.
Yeah. Although in that sketch, the great thing is that it's like he just kept thinking that his time would be over, and then Jan always thinks, no, sir, you have 40 more seconds.
Really good writing, and that just carried.
And you referenced him. I mean, Jim Downey is responsible for probably like most of the best debate sketches that and people know ever, including the years later the W. Bush and in Al Gore, the strategery lockbox sketch. I mean, Jim Downey, like, all that comes out of his head, and
Jim Downey has a really good rhythmic ability. He will go for strategery, that's like a little song, and I put it, and he teased out that lockbox, and it kept working it. Lockbox is like, you couldn't think of a better phrase for an Al Gore impression. Lockbox. So yeah, he's great. I had great people around me, but that would be me with friends. Like if I did a goofy impression of the water polo coach in high school, I would wind it further and further and abstract it, because I was in cold openings and Lauren really liked it. The character was working. I kept extenuating everything, and it was the only time I could sort of improvise, because it was a lockdown shot.
Right.
If I go I do it out there in that area, I get a laugh. I do it again. that whole area, do it again, So that became, I appreciate it more 30 years later because I saw when he passed something in the New York Times. I clicked on it. It was like, damn, it's like 8.5 minutes in one as George Bush Sr. with props. And it was great. I mean, it really killed. So it was fun to see years later and go, maybe it didn't suck.
Right. And then, of course, when you have things like Perot, I think it was on Larry King the first time he does the Can It Finish? You have to see that and go like, oh my God, thank God I got something new to squeeze in there. And it's like, I mean, he probably only said it once, but a lot of times because of the impression, I mean, it's like Sarah Palin, Tina does her and says, I can see Russia from my house. And then people literally attribute that to the actual Sarah Palin, so it's like,
and rhythmically extending something that's coming from a real place, so it's not made up. But can I finish one time? You're going to talk all over me. Can I finish one time? Can I finish one? He became James Brown, but somehow it works. So it's so silly and so abstract that once you get a hold of that as a comedian, and the audience is attached to it, then you're in an area that I love because there's no joke. There's no punchline. It's just purely character and rhythm. Can I finish one time? Or are you going to talk all over me? Love that song. Love it. That's as good as Not God That, same kind of thing. That's what I live for.
And when we first started talking, I was talking about how your audition had the Robin Leach impression, which I know you did on the show a few times. And it's funny to think about, these great spot on impressions that there's not really much call for anymore. And then, sometimes like when somebody passes away, there's always the appropriate mourning period for the loss of human life. But at some point you must have the moment where you're like, all right, I guess I have to, put that on the back burner for a while. But I mean, it's not like you can't do the Jimmy Stewart now. So at some point they come back, right?
Well, Jimmy Stewart of the old timey movie stars is the only one that extends now because the young people, a guy came up to me after a gig once, goes, hey, you did the It's a Wonderful Life, dude. So when you have it's Will Ferrell and Elf, when you have a Christmas classic, this just travels over generations. So, but yeah, sometimes I'll sign people off as Regis just to visit Regis, like on the Zoom, like with William Shatner, I got him just crying with laughter. We got to say go, but William Shatner, who doesn't love him? Captain Cook himself, he's all over the place. He's got Emmys everywhere you can see. We got to, it was just the charm of Regis and that rhythm, that old time kind of Groucho Marx sped up, sort of. Pick a single one, divide a duck among you. Pick a single one, divide a duck among you. Pick a single one, divide a duck among you. Everybody say, and also it's very Trump too. It was Trump and Brando Brando and Regis got me to Trump initially.
Oh, that's right. I feel like I've heard you kind of explain that sometimes it's like combining a couple bring you to. I can see that's funny. You're talking about the Paul McCartney bass line earlier, but Regis is kind of the Trump bass line. You kind of have that, and then you can add on to it. Right?
Yeah, I mean, now I'm just doing, James Austin Johnson. I was interviewing him for an hour, and he's doing his whole little throwing in these guttural things. So when you're doing that, it's a whole nother rhythm. Everybody was doing this, but then you go down here and you go there, and you know where we're going. We're going to do a lot of it, and people are saying they don't want to do it, but we're going to do it. And my Trump hook now is that there is no subject matter. It's just rhythm. And it sounds like he's pitching Family Vacation. Have you heard that one?
I haven't.
We're going to be going to a lot of places. Let me tell you, we're going to be doing things like you wouldn't believe. And we're going to do it. We're going to do a lot of it because we know how to. And everybody knows we're going to do it and they're going to see it. Some people say, no, we shouldn't. But we're going anyway. We're going to go there. And he never tells his family what they're doing. Sorry.
When Dennis's podcast ended was right around the 2020 election. So you were still kind of noodling around with Biden. Well, we've had him around. I mean, obviously the guy's been around for 50 years, but he's been in the limelight, so much more these last 3 years. What have you noticed about him as time has gone on? The big thing was like malarkey was big early on when he ran, but now he must give you so much more to work with, right?
Yeah, the early song was just whispery grandpa saving the nation from sort of the trauma of Trump, just the energy around Trump. And so it was it was kind of like my father, God rest his soul, lost his job, no joke. I'm not kidding around here. That was the first thing. He'd say something that clearly isn't a joke and say no joke. That was in those days. And the people, and always the list. Number one, the one part. Number two, what the guy said. Number three, you know the drill. Come on, folks. And then he'd admonish you for not knowing what the fuck he was talking about. Come on, folks. This isn't rocket science. Come on, let's get real. So that was that early puppety guy. And then after a while, he would do a patronizing whisper like my dad used to do. The rich don't, guess what? They don't pay their fair share. And then he would go to the yell, because they don't know how. We're going to pay the fair share. We know how to pay the fair share. So he's still doing that. I mean, at the State of the Union, that was the loudest I'd ever heard him. He was.
Yeah, that's the loudest he's ever been, I think.
Because we know we're going to take care of people and the senior citizens. The only thing I do on this is I always end up with one phrase. He finds his way to this one phrase. That's what people know to do. We're going to do it. We switch Pirates of the Caribbean. So he always says Pirates of the Caribbean at the end.
Yeah. But it's fun to, I guess, just be able to sort of watch those things as they develop. Is there an impression that you had to do on the show that you felt like, I got to go do it, it's on the air, where you just felt like you never actually even maybe did it more than once? You're just like, I never really felt like it sounded like them, but I had to go out there anyway?
Well, yeah. Sometimes in the early political campaigns, you'd be given some congressman or something, and you knew it was a one-off, and the audience has to know the voice too. That's why it's difficult now. There's so much fracturing, that you can, they know the political people, but it's not like everybody knows everybody who's famous. The great thing about SNL is they would force you to learn people. We need you to do Rain Man by Wednesday, that kind of thing. Sort of thing. So that it forces you, because honestly, trying to learn impressions when you don't have a clue is very painful. And you have to do it alone in a room, because when you don't have it at all, you literally don't. You don't. Yeah. So all I do if I'm trying is listen over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, and then hope something hits me, But I don't have any technique other than just keep listening.
Right. And before the heyday of the internet, when I interned there was 1998, and there weren't really computers in those offices, and there were like companies that taped everything, and you'd have to, like, as an intern, it's like, okay, you have to go get a tape of this from MSNBC because Daryl Hammond needs to learn this character. And it was like, now if you're learning something, it's like, okay, let me find thousands of hours of video and watch them on my phone. But it was also like, Franken had a Paul Tsongas impression that I remember seeing him do on the show. I don't know if it was spot on or not, but it was just like, it didn't, character. Even in 1992, it didn't matter,
I'd always wanted to, and I'm distracted in a good way with so many things going on, but John Malkovich is such a great voice. There's a subtle little lane he's in. It's very easy to go to John Travolta accidentally. Can't you tell that he's lying? But there is an impression there that's great. So that would be someone pushing me to do that. I had it one night in a hotel room in New York, and I had it beautifully. Like I had it, and then I lost it.
Right. And then when you have somebody like Travolta, of course, there's like, okay, you can do like sort of the modern day Travolta, but people are going to kind of want to hear, Vinnie Barbarino or Saturday Night Fever Travolta. It's like, it's like when Norm Macdonald would do Burt Reynolds. I remember this was actually I think this is when I was there. They tried to have him in the outfit from Boogie Nights, like the old Bert, and they did that in dress rehearsal. And then by the time they did the show, he was dressed like Smoking the Bandit Bert, because it's just like, nah, people just kind of want him to look like that,
Yeah, and the chewing
and
the gum and the offhanded kind of stuff. Yeah,
yeah,
okay. Just like the
yeah.
Smokey the Bandit character, basically.
Yeah,
Yeah,
my favorite of those was they did these outtakes of Star Wars auditions, and it was Burt Reynolds with the Darth Vader helmet, and he won't put it on. And he's like, "So this Darth Vader guy, what kind of car does he drive?" And he's chewing gum the whole time, and just in that
yeah.
like Norm delivery. So,
Norm was a secretly or not so secretly really good impressionist. He did a great take on Letterman, David Letterman.
yeah,
And his Bert is just a great take. I mean, it's like there's super accuracy, but if it's a funny take and it's enough of familiarity that, okay, we know who he's doing and it's funny. Usually you tease out one thing and just work that. Sometimes I'll go for decades without doing an impression. I was hanging out with Conan and Mike Sweeney, and somehow Henry Fonda came up
oh wow, okay,
because they were going to have Jane Fonda on the show. And I hadn't done Henry Fonda in about 25 years. And all of a sudden, all I could do was talk like Henry Fonda. And I just never thought you liked me. That's all. And so that was like, wow, I love doing that voice. I love that rhythm of Henry Fonda. I ran into a guy at Conan's place, happened to be Conan's place, Matt Powers, and he has a haircut. He looked kind of like the guy from Scooby-Doo that Casey Kasem would voice.
Casey, we're like, come on, Shaggy. Like, Scoob, let's make like a banana and split. I don't think I like this.
Just Casey Kasem with his throat catching. So I forget a lot of people. I don't really pursue it that much. I do miss riffing in voices, which I had a podcast before this called Fantastic. I just did a homemade one where I would do long form riffing. I do kind of miss that, which I don't do on fly, but it's really fun to bounce off Spade because he really makes me laugh. He's so funny. But that's one thing I kind of miss, long form riffing.
right, yeah, no, I could imagine. And if you're doing it with, like, say, Lovitz or somebody who they have their own basket full of impressions. Well, as we start to wind down here, it's a good time to ask the question of, you did SNL for a while, but that you were there for a turnover. Pretty much everybody you started with was gone. At what point do you decide, okay, I think I've done enough here? Lovitz told me when I talked to him last year, he actually wanted to stay a little bit longer. He wanted to do a movie. So, and at that point, Lorne was like, well, I'm not going to do the Lorne to you. I just realized, but he's like, well, Danny and John always came back when they were doing movies. And so, but then within a few years, they started letting people miss shows. But so he left, and then he would come back because they'd ask him to. Then they'd make fun of the fact that he would be back all the time. He's like, you wanted to stay. You asked me to come back. So for you, kind of watching some of that stuff, at what point do you think, like, okay, I think I've done as much as I can do here?
Well, I felt like I could have gone on for another 5 years creatively.
Okay.
Yeah. But I'm just basing the assumption that new people will come along. I had a team. I had Al, I had Robert Smigel, but so much had come together in 90 to 93. I'd reached so much heat that they were really trying to take over from Letterman. He was leaving. That was like a giant year of trying to figure out whether to do that. They were throwing a massive amount of money at me. They're throwing me movies at me. I had Tucson that I wrote with Bob Odenkirk, a comedy Western for me and Lovitz, and Hans and Franz, The Girly Man Dilemma, which we're going to be reading with Conan and Smigel and Nealon. We're going to read segments of the script that we wrote.
Oh, that's great.
The four of us wrote it, and then we're going to put it on Team Coco and his podcast, and talk about it. So I basically got so hot that I had too much to,
right.
Because Wayne's World had hit and we were going to do the sequel. And that was like that it could have been just that, but all the political impressions. So, and when I left, I was the longest cast member to ever be there. It was 7 years. Now, the very next day, Phil beat my record. But when I left, other people, 3 years, 3.5, Billy Crystal, 1 year. But I really feel like I'd reached sort of a peak and I had so much coming at me I think if I had less heat, I probably would have done that a few more years. But I almost did the talk show that Conan.
Yeah, I was going to ask you. It was one of the things I wanted to make sure I asked you. How close was it to actually happening that you would have taken over late night from Letterman, the show that Conan would go on to
really
host?
close. My wife wanted me to do it. The network wanted me to do it. Lorne, if you want to do that, fine. But I don't know what he wanted me to stay on the show, which I totally understood.
Right.
It was very, very close. I just had like a 6-month-old and a 2-year-old at the time. I didn't know how I could do 4 hours of TV every week.
Right.
And do the kid, I wasn't sure how that was going to work for me. But people do it, but that was a little bit like, it was very close. It was very close. Yeah. The only thing great about that, I would have had Smigel and Louis C.K. and Conan writing and producing for me. So you'd have like, a really good staff. I realized more later how important it is because it's so much energy to generate material. And I like to generate material, but then if you have other people, you could come up with an idea, like Smigel was like that. He was the best like that for me,
Yeah, and I mean, Smigel is, I've talked about, the way that he approaches things is he puts so much thought into it. I remember once I also interned on Conan Show. I remember once hearing Smigel explain why Triumph, the Intel Comic Dog, has that accent, and it's just very simple. He's like, well, because I think that dogs are all immigrants, so they should all talk with an accent. I'm like, it's like brilliant. It's so simple. It's like to the point, And but you're talking about great staffs, so I'd be remiss in not pointing out the crazy lineup that you had for the Dana Carvey show, the primetime ABC show. Yeah, that show, which now still available on DVD or however you find things these days.
Documentary on Hulu. What about it?
Yeah, and I mean, because you mentioned, I think Louis was a writer on that as well, but it was also Stephen. It was Colbert. It was Steve Carell. I'm forgetting somebody, I'm sure, but.
Robert Carlock was in some sketches and wrote. Dino Stephanopoulos, who's this brilliant writer. We had an all-star, Charlie Kaufman was writing for us, who writes all the brilliant, bizarre movies. We had an all-star cast and all-star writing. We just didn't have a studio, so we had to tape it on Sunday late afternoon.
Right.
Studio space. So it was another train wreck. It was, on prime time and had no chance. And that was just didn't follow my instincts. It happens.
Right. It was on after Home Improvement.
On ABC.
And it's interesting that it was ABC because I've heard the director Kevin Smith talk about how he got to do an animated version of Clerks. And the UPN network was going to do, I don't know, 13 or 22 guaranteed on the air. Then ABC came to him and was like, well, we'll do 6 and maybe we'll air some of them. And he's like, oh, this is ABC. And his advice to himself in retrospect is, you know what, sometimes don't go for the brass ring, just take the 12 on the air from UPN, because then you get to actually do the thing you want instead of have the thing that turns out,
I allowed myself to be a little bit manipulated. That was my fault. I decided after 2 weeks of thinking, let's do it on HBO. Yeah. So we can do 10, take a break, do 10, that kind of thing. There was no live streaming and all that, but other people wanted it with the big budget of ABC. Some people in managerial positions had deals at ABC that needed to deliver a show. So there was a lot of other stuff going on, and, so that was just me not following my instincts.
Right. Yeah.
But in the end of the day, now that it's considered brilliant, it was great that it gets all these accolades now, and Colbert and Carell credit me, and I go, you would have been discovered. And his wife Nancy goes, no, he really needed that at that time. It was like
his wife Nancy, who also was on SNL. It's so she knows
how great he is, and the fact that no matter how talented you are, you can just timing, you could slip through the cracks. And hopefully you're committed to having a career, and then you have this other style of career. Carell is going to have a career no matter what, but just the way that show got him to Jon Stewart and then got him to The Office, is really satisfying. It's fun. I don't even think it's part of my resume as talent scout or anything, but
Right.
to me, it became really clear at Colbert, the two Steves, we called them. And I didn't get any pushback at all. Of course, Robert loved them and Louis. We were the three kind of deciding factors, and they're great. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah, no, it's got to be a good feeling of finding people that obviously go on to have that level of success, not to give short shrift to it's not having that show, no doubt gave you other opportunities, things that you were able to go on and do it, instead of having to do one of the two shows for a network.
In the end of the day, I mean, what animated me was different things. I mean, because I was conflicted within myself. Like, one is, at that age, I had a Disney face. Two is, they kind of would see the church lady and not realize there's subversive things in there, in a sense. And so I think I confused Bob Iger and ABC. Like, okay, if anyone could do primetime, it's this guy. You got Carol Burnett likability and all that. So that was the confusion there. I didn't, fame comes with it, but I didn't pursue it or think about it. I don't really like it. I'm kind of a shut-in for a celebrity. I like being home. I mean, so there's a lot of reasons, but the fact that I just kept going, and I'm doing stuff now, and I'm getting very well paid and feeling very creative at this point on the planet. When you have data, and you too as well, when life goes on, the captain of the football team in high school, if I could just be him, and then that fades away. So
yeah, no, exactly. It's the key for what you're saying is that you're happy with what you're doing. And I think you've been very upfront about talking about it. You had some very serious health problems, which obviously that became a focus for a while. But at the same time, once that, and I'm sorry, I read for the first time that I guess when you were in there for your surgery, Sinatra was in the room next to you.
Well, when I was
passed away in the room next to you.
It checked out that they thought that it was reblocked. I was at Cedars-Sinai, and on the floor that night, Frank died. And I remember when they came in, I said, "Who came in?" They go, "Frank Sinatra did," to the ICU or cath lab, they call it. Yeah, so
Right.
He died in my arms, basically. I've had a lot of weird things happen to me, like everyone else. But my point is that wisdom comes with data, and then later on, you see that, oh, those two people went to war together with lawsuits, and now they're both dead. It's just you start to kind of relax into this whole idea of it. So the idea of, like, I could have been more famous or that, gets sillier and sillier as just the battlefield of life, the glorious shit show that this is, and nobody can go through it unless you're a hermit and not have some pain. I was in therapy for 5 years.
Well, what I love is whenever you and Dennis would reconnect as guests on his various shows, and my understanding is that when you guys just talk privately on the phone, you always start off with you told me it would get easier, like that was always the beginning.
Dennis always loved that. You told me life would get easier, and that always made him laugh. I still leave that message for him. You told me, you said, I remember the day, Carvey, it's tough now, but as you go forward in life, everything is smooth, gets easy as pie. Trust me.
The advice that I got from him was to a room of us, which was hit your knees, boys. Thank God that you're not me. He's like, every day, thank God that you're not me. But I don't know how. I don't think he meant it in as literal as that, because it would usually come after he was like really sort of like overanalyzing and micromanaging just things in his life that probably didn't matter, and that's when he's like, yeah, just hit your knees every day. This isn't in your head.
Trust me. I mean, Dennis and I had our backgrounds in our own nature. We seem like opposites, but we relate to each other in that way. And the fist fight that you have in your head all day, Mike Myers has it. Overthinkers, you could call it, or, one of the happiest people I know is just a very simple man. And just a guy who talks like this and everything's literal. Today I was out riding my bike, and it got real windy all of a sudden. I couldn't believe it. And this is no exaggeration. He's a lovely person, but he really is able to grasp the moment, and Dennis has such a giant brain that he's seen all of it, and the folly of it. And Christ's sakes, Carvey, this business will chew you up and spit you out in a nanosecond, okay? Nobody cares about you. I mean, he got mad at me because I turned down all these commercials, and he was completely right. You know?
Well, I mean, I don't believe that he turned down any commercials. I mean, he always told me that one of his favorite moments on his HBO show was when Vince Vaughn sat down and the first thing out of his mouth was, which one of your commercials is your favorite? Is it the 10-10-220 or the M&M's commercial? You know, it's like just Vince Vaughn, like at that point, at the peak of like pulling this, just giving him a little, you know, making fun of him for the commercials. And he's just like, he's just, Dennis laughed so hard in that clip because he's like, yeah, I mean, whatever. It's like,
Now
it's a paycheck.
New agents, and they said, it doesn't matter. Anyone can do, you want to do a game show? It doesn't matter. There's no commercials. None of it means anything anymore. Oh, okay. That's 100 million too late.
Yeah, right, exactly.
A lot I mean, you have the 90s. What did I think I was? Bob Dylan, you know?
the coolest guy in rock and roll right now, Dave Grohl, just did a Super Bowl commercial, and it's like, no, there's no thought about like, hey, is that going to be bad? No, it doesn't matter. The thing that I want to kind of end on is one of my favorite interactions from you and Dennis, as he's talked about this, was obviously sitting on that Weekend Update desk, and he was never a fan of the grumpy old man character. Me watching at home, I was always a big fan of the grumpy old man character. But I know that he said that maybe it was in rehearsal, but he leans in, he's like, this is going to eat shit. And then that sort of motivated you to like go like, oh, watch what I can do with the grumpy old man. And if I went for more than an hour without doing any requests, but if grumpy old man could somehow wish happy 10th anniversary to my podcast, the Bladtcast, on the way out, it would mean a lot to me, Dave.
It's one of the best podcasts you can ever see, the Bladtcast. Whoop-de-doo, we're watching it. We got no Wi-Fi. We can't hear a thing, but we love it.
Sorry, it's giving me a cough. Dennis had seen the cue cards and just thought, Christ's sake, you got nothing. There's no jokes. There's nothing. And then he said later on, he goes, you figured out some kind of mathematical equation in your skull, some kind of musicality thing. But the funny thing about that was the guy was so long for the olden days, even if it was miserable, they loved it because it just wasn't today.
We loved it. We couldn't get enough of it. It's like got sort of the same sort of blueprint as in the character that I liked that Lovitz and Tom Hanks would do, the two loser guys, like hello, and the girls walk by, he's like, and goodbye, things like, and my hairline is not helping one bit. It's just sort of like building on in like, oh yeah, these guys should be the most depressing guys, but they seem relatively happy. And grumpy old man wasn't that grumpy. He seemed pretty happy,
So it was abstract. He goes, we didn't have flame retardant sleepwear. Like, do we have it? If you went to bed smoking, you woke up engulfed in flames. Whoop-de-doo, I'm a flaming corpse. And that's the way it was, and we liked it. We loved it. So that was the turn of it. And I think Bob Odenkirk came up with that part of it, it was very funny.
Yeah. Well, Dana, I could talk to you all day, but I won't do that to you. And I'm glad. It's like having the Beatles do Twist and Shout at the end of the set. I had you do a grumpy old man at the end because it gave you a little bit of a cough. So it'll be perfect. But
lad, good luck with the whole thing. And, here's to another 500, get you to 1,000, which is more than 500 last time I checked.
All right, give you Paul. Always got to do Paul.
You always have to do Paul, and like at Christmas time this year, they reran the global warming Christmas special where Paul comes in and he's doing this thing about like trying to explain global warming, and I love like Paul taking big ideas and just sort of like, because then what have you got, and it's just like very simple, and.
That's this humble Liverpudlian thing. The way he deals with being Paul McCartney is just, just very, well, God, you're the Beatles. Sorry, I'm so nervous. Well, we'd sit down for a plonk and look at each other and we'd plonk back and forth, like a mirror looking at each other. And we just plonk for a while. That's how we came up with Day Tripper, just plonking. So it's just, he wants it to be humble and fun and easy. And it's just so funny because the songs are genius, and a guy's talking like that. It's just funny. It'll always be funny.
Yeah, well, it's always funny to me, and I always enjoy anytime getting the chance to talk to you. When we would be doing those interviews with Dennis, you would call me like the day before, and you'd be trying bits out with me on the phone for half an hour. I'm like, he knows this is just me on this call, right? And it was like I'm getting like this private interaction with Dana Carvey. He's like, testing out voices. I always appreciated that, and for you to help us celebrate 10 years really means a lot. People should find the Fly on the Wall podcast wherever podcasts are found, and of course, just at Dana Carvey on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram as well, I believe.
Yes, yeah. I don't do too much of it, but I'm posting lately. It's fun.
Yeah, right,
All right.
exactly.
Appreciate
Well,
it.
thank you so much, Dana Carvey. I really appreciate it.
Okay, peace out. God bless.
Bye.
Bye-bye.